Logic says a person cannot just evaporate. Matter doesn't disappear, but in New Jersey, the impossible happens more than you think. We are opening the files on cases where the physical evidence simply stops. No bodies, no reasons, just silence. Some are famous, others are forgotten, but all of them are unsolved. New Jersey is the most densely populated state in America. There are eyes everywhere, cameras on every corner, neighbors who know your car, your schedule, your dog's name. You can drive the entire length of it in 3 hours. There is nowhere to vanish here, and yet they do. From playgrounds surrounded by families, from the ends of their own driveways, from shore towns and pine forests in ordinary Monday mornings. They say, "I'll be right back," and mean it. Subscribe to the channel, lock your doors, and let's begin. It's April 13th, 2024, Burlington County, New Jersey. A Saturday morning in the Pine Barrens, which is a sentence that deserves its own moment of consideration. Because the Pine Barrens is not a place most people understand until they've been there. The New Jersey Pine Barrens is the largest wilderness area in the eastern United States, 1.1 million acres of coastal plain forest, scrub oak and pitch pine and cedar swamps and bogland that stretches across 7 counties in southern New Jersey. It is, depending on what kind of person you are, either the most peaceful place in the state or the most unnerving. The trees are dense and tangled. The soil is sandy and acidic, which is why the forest floor stays clean of underbrush in some areas and chokes it in others. The roads through the barrens, the dirt roads and the service tracks, and the lanes that nobody gave useful names to, they go nowhere you'd expect. They end at nothing. They branch into other roads that branch again, and after enough turns you can lose all sense of where you came from. HBO's The Sopranos made the Pine Barrens famous for a specific reason. It's the kind of place where things disappear. And on April 13th, 2024, Danielle Lopez disappeared in it. Let me tell you who Danielle was before I tell you what happened to her. Because Danielle Lopez was a person with a story, a full and complicated one, the kind that involves both great joy and profound loss, and that story matters for understanding the day she vanished. Danielle was 37 years old. She grew up and eventually lived in Willingboro, New Jersey. Her mother, Sue Quackenbush, described her with love and a kind of bittersweet vividness. Danielle was kind. She was fun. She was loving. She was, in her mother's telling, rather loud, a quality Danielle herself acknowledged with characteristic wit. Her favorite expression, Sue said, was, "You didn't name me Dan Quiet, you named me Danielle." The kind of joke that tells you everything about someone's personality in 6 words. But Danielle's life had been shaped by loss in ways that most people never have to navigate. When she was in her 20s, both of her brothers died within 10 months of each other. One died by suicide in 2015. The other was killed in a car accident 10 months later. 2 brothers, 1 year. A grief so layered and so close together that no one could emerge from it unchanged. She struggled. Her mother acknowledged this plainly, not as a criticism, but as the truth of someone who watched her daughter carry an enormous weight. Danielle was dealing with the loss of her brothers. She found ways through. Sue helped her get into a recovery program and supported her through it. And years later, when the COVID pandemic hit, Danielle lost her beloved grandfather, with whom she was particularly close, to the disease. And then, less than a month after her grandfather died, Danielle's father died of a heart attack. Then, just 1 month before she disappeared, Danielle had to make the decision to euthanize her dog, Roscoe, who was old and in pain. She loved that dog. Sue said it simply, she loved her dog. Grief layered on grief over years. And yet, by the accounts of those who knew her and the conversations her mother had with her in the weeks before April 13th, Danielle was hopeful. She was in a better place. She had weathered the losses and she was looking forward. Sue was in touch with her constantly, calling twice a day, the kind of maternal surveillance that exists specifically because you know the terrain of your child's emotional landscape and you want to stay close. On Friday, April 12, 2024, Danielle told her mother she was going camping in Wharton State Park, which sits inside the Pine Barrens. She was going with her boyfriend, a man named James Scott Dunn, who had been her on-again, off-again partner for approximately 7 years. Their relationship was long and complicated in the way that relationships of that duration often are. Sue said she asked Danielle how she was doing, whether she was cold, whether she and her companion were comfortable. Danielle said yes, they were comfortable. That was the last conversation between them, the last call, the last exchange. On the morning of April 13, 2024 at 9:11 a.m., Surveillance cameras at a Wawa convenience store on Route 72 in Vincenttown, New Jersey, caught Danielle Lopez on footage. She was buying coffee. This is the last confirmed commercial record of her existence on that day. A cup of coffee at a Wawa on a Saturday morning in April. That same day, Danielle's car, a blue 2008 Hyundai Accent, got stuck on a dirt road in the Pine Barrens known as Lost Lane. She had been driving down Lost Lane, and, by her own account in the last conversation anyone had with her, she had been distracted looking at the trees when she drove into a water-filled rut and the car became stuck. She couldn't get it out. A blogger and freelance photographer happened to be driving down Lost Lane that afternoon with a companion. They encountered Danielle walking alone on the road. Somewhere around 6 p.m., she told them what had happened. She had been distracted looking at the trees. She drove into the puddle. The car was stuck. She said this matter-of-factly, the way a person says something slightly embarrassing that happened to them. The blogger and his companion apparently told her they would check on the car and come back. Whether they did is a matter that Danielle's mother has noted with barely contained grief. Quackenbush said, "I guess, regrettably, they didn't call in or offer any help. They said they would go check out the car and come back." That brief encounter at approximately 6 p.m. on April 13, 2024 is the last known interaction between Danielle Lopez and any confirmed living human witness. 3 months after she disappeared, the photographer's GoPro footage from that afternoon was handed over to police. It showed Danielle alone on the dirt road, her car stuck in the water of the rut. Her mother confirmed the footage showed her daughter. Danielle was alive at 6 p.m. She was mobile. She was not visibly in distress beyond the inconvenience of a stuck car. Then the footage ends and the question begins. On May 1, 2024, 18 days after Danielle was last seen, investigators found her car still stuck on Lost Lane. It hadn't been there long enough to be completely swallowed by the forest, but long enough that finding it required knowing where to look. When police processed the vehicle, they found personal property inside, clothing and other items. No cell phone. Officers believe her cell phone was still with Danielle at the time the car was found, meaning she had it on her. Sue said she asked Danielle how she was doing, whether she was cold, whether she and her companion were comfortable. Danielle said yes, they were comfortable. That was the last conversation between them, the last call, the last exchange. On the morning of April 13, 2024 at 9:11 a.m., surveillance cameras at a Wawa convenience store on Route 72 in Vincenttown, New Jersey, caught Danielle Lopez on footage. She was buying coffee. This is the last confirmed commercial record of her existence on that day. A cup of coffee at a Wawa on a Saturday morning in April. That same day, Danielle's car, a blue 2008 Hyundai Accent, got stuck on a dirt road in the Pine Barrens known as Lost Lane. She had been driving down Lost Lane, and, by her own account in the last conversation anyone had with her, she had been distracted looking at the trees when she drove into a water-filled rut and the car became stuck. She couldn't get it. Now, a critical detail. James Scott Dunn, the boyfriend who had been camping with Danielle, told investigators he last saw her on the morning of April 13th, the camping trip. He says he last saw her in the morning. She is on the Wawa footage buying coffee at 9:11 a.m., and she is seen walking alone on Lost Lane at approximately 6 p.m. Dunn is currently in state prison on a matter unrelated to Danielle's disappearance, according to prison records. Investigators have stated there is no evidence pointing definitively to foul play. They have interviewed dozens of people and developed no viable leads from those conversations. The official posture is that the cause of Danielle's disappearance remains unknown and under active investigation. But here is what sits at the center of this case and refuses to move. The Pine Barrens is vast and people can and do become disoriented in it, particularly on unmarked dirt roads at dusk. Danielle's car was stuck. She was alone, she had her phone, and she did not call anyone. She did not call her mother. This is the detail that will not go away. Sue calls twice a day. The relationship between them, by every account, was close. If Danielle was stranded on a dirt road in the Pine Barrens with a stuck car and her phone in her pocket, the first call would have been to Sue. The second call would have been to 911 or a tow truck. She was not someone who would suffer in silence when a phone call was available. She didn't call, which means either she did call and those records haven't been made public in a way that explains them, or something prevented her from making that call between 6 p.m. and whenever her phone went dark. Sue Quackenbush has spent 2 years fighting the $25,000 reward she is offering for information leading directly to Danielle's location or safe recovery, is her own money, her own life savings poured into the search for her daughter. She has driven roads through the Pine Barrens herself. She has distributed flyers. She has spoken to the media and the Dateline Missing in America podcast and anyone who would listen. She is her daughter's only voice, she said. She will stay well to fight for Danielle. She has already buried 2 sons. She will not accept not knowing what happened to her daughter. The Sioux Center for Missing Persons secured billboards of Danielle along I-295 in Burlington County. Private investigator Jimmy Ramsey has taken the case pro bono, tracking down the fellow camper who had apparently been bothering Danielle at the campsite before she disappeared. That man claimed he left the area on the day Danielle disappeared. His claim remains unverified in any public record. Danielle Lopez was a woman with a quick wit and an infectious personality, and a loud laugh, and a dog she loved and brothers she missed every day. She drove into a puddle on a dirt road because she was looking at the trees, which is the most Danielle thing anyone could imagine. She was a person who looked at trees. She was standing on Lost Lane at 6 p.m. on April 13, 2024. Her car was stuck, her phone was in her pocket, and then the Pine Barrens closed around her and she was gone. The forest doesn't give up what it takes without being asked very specifically. And somewhere along Lost Lane, or off it, in the scrub oak and the cedar swamp and the sandy trails that led nowhere and everywhere, the answer to where Danielle went is waiting. Her mother is still asking. It's November 25, 1991. Delhaven, New Jersey, the day before Thanksgiving. The whole country is in that particular mood that only exists on the day before a holiday, that warm domestic hum of preparation, turkeys in ovens, family expected the next day, the smell of something baking, the particular quiet of a neighborhood that knows tomorrow will be loud. Delhaven is a small community in Middle Township, Cape May County. You need to understand the geography here because it shapes everything. This is South Jersey Shore country, the part of New Jersey that doesn't show up on postcards and travel features. Not the boardwalk towns, not the flashy resort strips. This is flat, rural coastal land. The Delaware Bay is close. The marshes are everywhere, wide and open and smelling of salt and mud. In November, the tourist population has long since vanished. What's left is the skeleton of a community, the year-round residents, the locals, the families who live here when no one is watching. On Sunray Road in Delhaven, an 11-year-old boy named Mark Heimbaugh was getting ready to go outside. Mark was born on May 23, 1980. He was a red-headed kid with freckles, the kind of face you could pick out of a crowd at a glance. His mother Maureen described him as a curious George, a good little boy. He was the kind of kid who ran toward interesting things rather than away from them. He had a brother, Matthew. The family lived in a modest house in the neighborhood. Mark went to Cape May County Alternative Middle School. He was dealing with some emotional and behavioral challenges, working through them with medication and therapy, and by November of 1991, things had been improving. That afternoon, something interesting was happening nearby. A brush fire had broken out in the marsh south of the Heimbaugh home. Not a dangerous fire, not an emergency, just the kind of thing that happens in salt marsh country in autumn. A controlled burn that got a little larger than planned, or a dry patch igniting from some spark, but it was visible, smoke rising, firefighters arriving. And for a curious 11-year-old boy on the day before Thanksgiving, with the whole afternoon ahead of him and nothing particular to do, a nearby fire with firefighters working it was irresistible. Maureen let him go. Of course she did. What parent wouldn't? It was the middle of the afternoon in his own neighborhood to watch firefighters. She planned to run a quick errand, something that should have taken 5 minutes. She expected to be back before him. She kissed him and watched him go. Mark was wearing a navy blue sweatshirt, gray-colored pants, and LA Gear sneakers. His left foot was healing from a recent fracture and was no longer in a cast. He walked toward the fire, toward the excitement, toward the thing that had caught his attention. That's the last time his mother ever saw him. Now here's where the story starts to fracture in ways that keep investigators awake at night, even 30-plus years later. The fire set off a chain reaction in the neighborhood's traffic pattern. Cape May County Park South is located nearby on Bayshore Road, a short distance from the Heimbaugh home, a place Mark liked to visit. It had a playground. A park guard was working that afternoon, and at approximately 4 p.m., that park guard saw Mark Heimbaugh walking toward the playground. That is the last confirmed sighting. The park guard is the last person known to have seen Mark alive. But there are other sightings, unconfirmed and haunting, that add texture to those final hours. Multiple witnesses reported seeing Mark that afternoon near the playground, talking to two individuals in a vehicle. The vehicle was described as white or gray, possibly a car. One of the two men was described in enough detail that police were later able to create a composite sketch. He was estimated to be between 30 and 35 years old, with a dark reddish-brown ponytail. He stood around 5 feet 8 or 9 inches tall, weighed approximately 150 pounds, and appeared generally unkempt. There's no solid description of the second man. Stop and sit with that image for a moment. An 11-year-old boy watching a fire in the marshes, drifting toward the park he likes, and two adult men in a vehicle, talking to him. Here's the crucial detail investigators pieced together later. The fire had caused police to set up traffic diversions in the area. Traffic was being routed down roads it normally wouldn't travel, including Sunray Road, Marks Street. This means the neighborhood was flooded with unfamiliar vehicles that afternoon. Cars and trucks that had no reason to be there were suddenly driving through a quiet residential area because the police themselves had redirected them there. If someone was looking for an opportunity, the detour delivered one. It brought traffic through a neighborhood it normally didn't see. It created anonymity. It created chaos. And somewhere in that chaos, a curious red-headed boy was standing near a playground, and two men in a vehicle were talking to him. When Mark didn't come home for dinner that evening, Maureen reported him missing at 5 p.m. The search began immediately. Canine units, volunteers, helicopters, all deployed to search the Del Haven marshes, the Delaware Bay Beach, and the nearby woods. The search was massive. The fear was straightforward initially. A child near marshland goes missing. You look for water. You look for soft ground. You look for the places a child might fall and not be able to get out. They found nothing. No body, no clothing, no trace. But they found one thing, and it would become one of the most debated pieces of evidence in the entire case. One of Mark's sneakers was found on a Delaware Bay beach. Just one. Just the sneaker. Left behind on a strip of beach where the bay meets the land as if placed or dropped. A single artifact with no body attached to it. No story explaining how it got there. No context. One sneaker. On a beach, that's all. Now investigators have argued about what this sneaker means for 30 years. The theory that police initially pursued was that Mark had drowned in the bay or become trapped in the marsh. The geography supports the possibility. The water is close, the terrain is treacherous. An 11-year-old boy with a recently healed foot fracture, moving through difficult ground, could conceivably have gotten into trouble. But here is the problem with that theory. Here is why it falls apart. The search was exhaustive. Dogs trained to find human remains in water and on land worked those marshes. Divers and search teams worked the bay, and they found nothing. Not a body, not more clothing, not a second sneaker, just the one sitting on the beach like a question mark. And if the sneaker had been carried by tidal action, if Mark had drowned and the water had eventually deposited his shoe on the beach, you'd expect more. You'd expect a body, eventually. Delaware Bay is not a vast ocean. It is a defined body of water with understood tidal patterns. Bodies resurface. Evidence accumulates on shorelines. It happens consistently. But no body was ever found. Now let's talk about Thomas Butkovich. Investigators working the composite sketch of the man with the reddish-brown ponytail eventually identified a person of interest. His name was Thomas Butkovich Jr., a Pennsylvania man in his 50s. The composite sketch resembled him. When police looked into his background, they found that he had a history of sex crimes against young boys and would eventually be sentenced to 18 to 36 years in prison for those crimes. Then, in 1993, something extraordinary happened. A male sex worker approached police with a videotape. The tape showed Butkovich sexually assaulting a young boy. The boy in the video was handcuffed. He was gagged. He appeared terrified. And according to the man who brought the tape forward, Butkovich had told him something that should have shattered the case open. That the boy in the tape was Mark Heimbaugh. Butkovich allegedly also claimed he had planted the sneaker on the beach himself to mislead investigators. If true, this is not a cold case. This is solved. A perpetrator naming himself, naming his victim, explaining the planted evidence. But Butkovich denied it, consistently. The video was analyzed. The identity of the boy in the tape could not be definitively confirmed as Mark. Without that confirmation, without physical evidence linking Butkovich to the Heimbaugh home or the Del Haven neighborhood on that specific date, no charges were filed in connection with Mark's disappearance. Butkovich went to prison for his other crimes. He served his time, and the Mark Himmelbaugh case remained officially unsolved. There's another piece of audio evidence in this case that deserves attention. In December 2010, at 3:45 in the morning, a man placed a call to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children from a payphone outside a Sunoco gas station in Philadelphia's Port Richmond neighborhood. The caller was breathless. He said he needed to be brief. He gave investigators a name, Gilbert Patrick Marie, and described this person as someone who may have been involved in Mark's disappearance. The caller described himself as the son of a witness to the crime. The caller's voice, according to investigators, sounded sincere. Middle Township Police received a similar call that same night. They were never able to track down the named person or the caller himself. Think about that call. A man alone at a payphone at 3:45 in the morning, 80 miles from where Mark disappeared, speaking quickly because he knows he's not going to be on long. He's afraid of something. He knows something. He doesn't want to be identified, and then he disappears back into the city. That call has never been fully explained. Mark's mother, Maureen, never stopped looking. She attended missing children's conferences. She spoke publicly, year after year, at the anniversaries of her son's disappearance. She kept photos of him on her refrigerator, the original and the age-progressed images showing what he might look like as an adult. She wrote poems on his birthday. In one of them she wrote, "I was 40 then, now 66 and retired. 27 years ago at 11 you last went out to play." She said openly that she had accepted she might go to her grave without knowing, but she said she wasn't willing to give up on him coming home, both things at once. The acceptance and the refusal. That's what this case does to a family. It splits you in half. In recent years, the Middle Township Police Department, in partnership with the FBI, has begun using artificial intelligence to re-examine the evidence. AI tools that can analyze decades-old photographs, audio recordings, composite sketches, and witness statements in ways that weren't possible in 1991, or 2001, or even 2010. The hope is that patterns invisible to human investigators might become visible to a system that doesn't forget, doesn't get tired, and doesn't get emotionally overwhelmed by what it's looking for. A boy who would be 44 years old now. A red-headed kid in a navy blue sweatshirt who went to watch a fire in the marsh on the day before Thanksgiving and never came home. His sneakers sitting on a Delaware Bay beach, placed there or washed there. The only physical thing that connects to him after the park guard saw him walking toward the playground. The fire detour brought strange cars down Sunray Road that afternoon. The chaos of an ordinary emergency created a window, and two men in a white or gray vehicle were talking to an 11-year-old boy near a playground. Maureen Himbaugh's home is full of reminders of Mark. She kisses his photograph, she said once. She presses her finger to it and kisses it. 33 years of that gesture. 33 years of a mother speaking to a photograph of her child, not knowing if he's alive or buried, or somewhere in between. Mark Himbaugh walked toward the smoke on a November afternoon in 1991. He was curious. He was 11. He was wearing LA Gear sneakers and a navy sweatshirt, and the neighborhood swallowed him. His sneaker ended up on a beach. His body was never found. His case remains unsolved. The Marshall fires in Delhaven still burn in autumn. The park is still there. The bay is still there. And somewhere in the distance between what was known and what was hidden, Mark Himbaugh is still waiting to be found. It's September 16, 2019, Bridgeton, New Jersey. A Monday afternoon, the kind of late summer day that the calendar says is still technically warm, but the light has that golden September slant to it that tells you the season is turning. School had just started the week before. Dulce Maria Alaves had attended her very first day of kindergarten at Buckshootum Road Elementary School just days earlier. She was 5 years old. Let that settle for a moment. Bridgeton is a small city in Cumberland County, about an hour south of Philadelphia, sitting in a flat stretch of South Jersey farmland. It has a large and tightly knit Mexican-American immigrant community, people who came here for a better life, who built families and routines and roots. The community has its own rhythms, its own gathering places, its church services and quinceañeras and neighborhood parks where parents bring their children on afternoon walks. Bridgeton City Park is one of those places. It's a public park behind Bridgeton High School on Burt Street, off Babe Ruth Drive. It has a playground. On a September afternoon, it has children. On September 16, 2019, it had Dulce. Dulce Maria Alaves was everything a 5-year-old should be. She had brown hair and brown eyes. She was small, the way 5-year-olds are, taking up a tiny amount of space in the world, but filling a family's entire emotional landscape. She had just started kindergarten. She loved the movie Moana. Her family would later throw her birthday parties with Moana decorations. Birthday parties held at a park where she wasn't present. A ritual of hope that became its own kind of heartbreak. That afternoon, her mother Noema Alaves Perez had brought Dulce and Dulce's 3-year-old brother Manuel to the park. Noema was 14 years old when Dulce was born, a young mother navigating a complicated family arrangement. She and the children shared custody with Noema's parents. Dulce and Manuel lived primarily with their maternal grandparents. Dulce's father had moved to Sinaloa, Mexico when she was 3. He hadn't been part of her daily life. Noema also had her 8-year-old sister with her that afternoon. At the park, the children went to the playground, the swings. That's where children go when you take them to a park with a playground. The swings are always the destination. Noema and her younger sister stayed in the car in the parking lot, about 30 yards away. Let me pause on that detail, because it's come a source of public scrutiny that deserves an honest examination. 30 yards is not a great distance. A car parked 30 yards from a playground with children on the swings is not a case of abandonment. It's a parent making a judgment call that reasonable people make hundreds of times every day in parks across this country. Children on swings in a public park on a Monday afternoon in a neighborhood community space. An adult nearby. This was not negligence. This was a completely ordinary afternoon. At some point, Manuel came back to the car. He was 3 years old, and 3-year-olds tire of swings. He walked back to his mother, and when Noema looked toward the playground, Dulce wasn't there. She got out of the car. She called Dulce's name. She checked the swings, the slide, the spots where children hide during games. She checked the perimeter of the playground. She looked toward the parking lot. She looked toward the trees at the edge of the park. Nothing. She ran through the park, calling her daughter's name. Other people in the area joined the search. The whole community began combing the grounds. Dulce Maria Alaves had vanished from a public playground in broad daylight. 2 hours later, at approximately 7:15 p.m., the family called the police. That 2-hour gap has been examined relentlessly by investigators and the public, but its explanation is straightforward and human. This was an immigrant family in a community where distrust of authority is not irrational, where people exhaust every other option before involving law enforcement, where the instinct is to handle things within the community first. They searched. Neighbors searched. Only when the search produced nothing did they call. Those 2 hours mattered because of what they meant for response time. An Amber Alert was issued. The FBI's Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team was activated. But by then, Dulce had been gone for over 2 hours, and in an abduction, 2 hours is a very long time. Now let's talk about what investigators found when they processed the scene, because the physical evidence is both informative and maddeningly incomplete. Surveillance video was recovered showing Dulce in the park before she disappeared. The footage confirmed her presence, confirmed what she was wearing, and placed her at the playground. But the cameras did not capture the moment she vanished. Whatever happened in those critical seconds or minutes was not on video. What witnesses at the park did provide were 2 separate descriptions of a potential suspect, and they don't entirely match. This is where the case becomes complicated. The initial Amber Alert, derived from witness accounts gathered immediately after Dulce disappeared, described a light-skinned Hispanic male, 5 feet 6 inches to 5 feet 8 inches tall, thin build, no facial hair but acne on his face. He was reportedly wearing orange sneakers, possibly Nike, red pants, and a black shirt. Witnesses said this man put Dulce into a red van with a sliding door and tinted windows and left the park. That image, the red van with tinted windows, became the central visual in the initial investigation. Police put it everywhere. Billboards, flyers, news broadcasts. Have you seen this van? Nearly a month later, on October 15, 2019, police released a composite sketch from a second witness. This witness described a Hispanic man, approximately 30 to 35 years old, slender build, 5 feet 7 inches tall, with a goatee and some pimples or moles on his chin. He was wearing a white t-shirt, blue jeans, and a white baseball cap. Police were careful to note that this composite was developed from a witness who had recently come forward, and that this man was described as a possible witness, not necessarily the suspect himself. This was not the same person from the Amber Alert description. 2 people in or near a playground, 2 descriptions, a 5-year-old girl gone. and a red van that no one has ever definitively identified or located. The FBI searched the park and surrounding areas extensively. Cadaver dogs, drones, ground teams walking the wooded areas and drainage ditches near Babe Ruth Drive. They found nothing indicating Dulce had been harmed and left nearby. That absence is meaningful. It means she was moved, transported out of the immediate area quickly, before anyone could respond. Think about the logistics of that. A child abducted from a public playground in a fenced area surrounded by families, placed into a vehicle and driven away, all within the window of time between when Noema last saw Dulce on the swings and when Manuel came back to the car alone. That window, based on all available evidence, was not large. We are talking about minutes. This was not random. This was fast. This was someone who knew what they were doing. The FBI has been direct about their theory. Special Agent Daniel Garabrandt stated publicly that investigators believe Dulce's abduction may have been a crime of opportunity. Someone was in that park that afternoon and saw a small child playing alone near the swings while her mother was 30 yards away in a car. They acted quickly. They acted with enough confidence and control that a 5-year-old did not create a scene that alarmed multiple adults. This is the physics of abducting a small child. A 5-year-old can be lifted. A 5-year-old can be distracted. A 5-year-old who is told the right thing by the right person. Someone who says, "Your mommy sent me to get you," or "Let's go play somewhere," might go willingly. And a 5-year-old placed into a van is silent in a way that an older child or adult would not be. Garabrandt also said something that the family found both hopeful and agonizing. "We believe there are witnesses out there who saw the abductor, who saw the vehicle in the area of the park. They either haven't come forward because they're afraid, or don't realize how important the information is." That's the reality of Bridgeton's immigrant community. Fear of immigration enforcement has historically kept people from calling police, from coming forward as witnesses, from cooperating with authorities even when they genuinely want to help. Cumberland County prosecutors have been explicit in their public statements that no one who comes forward with information about Dulce will have their immigration status used against them. The offer of protection has been made clearly and repeatedly, and yet the key witness, the person who saw what happened at those swings, if they exist, has not come forward. A $75,000 reward has been offered. The investigation has received tips from across the country, including from Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Nevada, and as far as Texas and Mexico. Every one of those tips has been followed up. None has led to Dulce. In 2023, investigators began using artificial intelligence to re-examine the case, the same technology being applied to the Mark Heimbaugh case from 1991. AI tools analyzing surveillance footage, witness accounts, and geographic data in ways that weren't possible in 2019. The hope is that something invisible to human eyes might become visible to a system without fatigue or bias. Multiple age progression images have been released showing what Dulce might look like as she gets older. She would be 11 years old now. She started kindergarten 1 week before she disappeared. She would be finishing 5th grade. She would be at that age where children are figuring out who they are, making best friends, having opinions about music and movies. She loved Moana. Her family still throws Moana-themed birthday parties for her. Noema has given interviews on every anniversary of Dulce's disappearance. Every year she says the same thing in different words. It has been another year of not knowing. Another year of an unanswered question that lives inside her like a second heartbeat. I don't even know how my daughter will look today. Dulce's father, who has remained in Mexico, was questioned during the initial investigation and denied any involvement. Family members have not been named as suspects. Investigators' working theory remains stranger abduction, someone who came to the park and left with a child they had no prior connection to. Bridgeton City Park is still there. The playground is still there. The swings where Dulce played are still there. On the anniversary of her disappearance, families still come to the park to release balloons and hold vigils. The community has not let her go. The community shows up every September 16th and insists that a 5-year-old girl from their neighborhood is not forgotten. Dulce was wearing a yellow shirt with an elephant design on the front, black and white checked pants with flowers on them, and white sandals. If you had passed her on the street that afternoon, you would have thought, what a sweet little kid. You would have thought nothing at all. She was ordinary in the most beautiful way, a 5-year-old living inside the enormous smallness of being 5, interested in swings and movies, and the ordinary magic of a Monday afternoon. Park. and then she was gone, 30 yards from her mother's car, from a playground with a fence, in a public park on a Monday afternoon. The red van has never been found. The man in orange sneakers has never been identified. The composite has been seen by hundreds of thousands of people, and Dulce Maria Alaves, who started kindergarten 1 week before she disappeared, is still out there somewhere, waiting for the puzzle piece that breaks this case open. It's July 12, 2015, Mays Landing, New Jersey, a Sunday. Summer in Atlantic County, which means the kind of thick coastal heat that blankets everything and makes the cicadas loud and the afternoons slow. About 20 miles west of Atlantic City, the houses are spaced out, the roads are lined with pine trees, and the railroad tracks cut through the landscape like a dark seam stitched through the earth. Tiffany Idame Valiante was 18 years old, and by every measure available to the people who loved her, she was on the verge of everything. Let me tell you who Tiffany was before I tell you how she died. Because it matters enormously, and it is the reason that her family and thousands of people who followed this case have never accepted the official explanation. Tiffany was a star athlete at Oakcrest High School. Not just good, not just on the team, she earned varsity letters in multiple sports. She played volleyball with the kind of talent that doesn't exist in every generation. She had received a full scholarship to Mercy College in New York to play volleyball, and she was going to be a middle starter as a freshman, a position that doesn't normally go to first-year players. Her coach believed in her that much. She had dreams of playing volleyball in the U.S. Olympics. She was planning to major in criminal justice. She was also considering the Air Force or law enforcement. She hadn't picked one direction yet because the future was wide open and all of it looked possible. She also loved softball. She had just graduated high school. She had clothes for her dorm room still in bags in her bedroom, waiting to be packed. The life she had been working toward for 18 years was 72 days away from starting. On July 12th, the Valiante family spent the afternoon across the street at her cousin's graduation party. Tiffany relaxed by the pool with relatives. She took pictures. She played volleyball. She made plans for decorating her new dorm room. By all accounts, including her father Stephen's, she was having a genuinely good time. She had come out as gay at the beginning of 2015. Her parents, Stephen and Diane, say they were supportive. Some of her classmates would later tell investigators that Tiffany may have been having a harder time with this than she let on at home. There had been some counseling. There was an argument that evening at the party, something involving a credit card dispute with a friend. It was a disagreement, the kind teenagers have. Not a crisis, not a breaking point. At 9:15 p.m., Tiffany left the party and walked across the street to her house on Mannheim Avenue to shower and change. Around that same time, Diane received a call from one of Tiffany's friends who wanted to talk. Diane went back to her own house to speak with the friend. At some point after 9:15 p.m., in the last image that exists of Tiffany Valiante, she was caught on surveillance footage at the end of her own driveway. She was wearing her new shoes and a headband. She appeared to leave the property, and then Tiffany was gone. Her parents searched. They called her name. They called her friends. They filed a missing person report. A search party began working the area around the house. That search went on for hours. Deep into the night, Tiffany's family and neighbors moving through the dark pines, calling her name. Her mother found her headband on the ground. She found Tiffany's new shoes. Both were discovered a few weeks later after Tiffany's death, during a walk Diane took through the area near the railroad tracks. Because that's where this ends, and this is where it gets complicated, and dark, and contested in ways that have consumed the Valiante family for a decade. NJ Transit Train 4693 traveling from Philadelphia toward Atlantic City struck and killed a person near mile marker 45 just after 11 p.m. On the night of July 12th, approximately 4 to 5 miles from the Valiante home on Mannheim Avenue. The body was all but unidentifiable due to the force of the impact. After speaking with Tiffany's uncle, a retired state trooper who arrived at the scene, NJ Transit Police determined that the remains were hers. Within 48 hours, the state medical examiner's office ruled the death a suicide. Let's go through why the Valiante family and an increasing number of investigators and experts have rejected that ruling. Because the anomalies in this case don't add up to a story that can be accepted simply on the authority of a form and a signature. First, the shoes. Tiffany was seen wearing new shoes at the end of her driveway at 9:15 p.m. She was not wearing those shoes when she was struck by the train near mile marker 45. Her shoes were found separately, discovered weeks later in a wooded area along the route between her home and the tracks. The official theory requires you to believe that Tiffany walked approximately 4 miles, largely through an unlit, wooded area, removed her shoes at some point in the woods, and then continued another mile or so barefoot to the railroad tracks. Let's examine that. There are no streetlights along most of that route. Tiffany Valiante suffered from nyctophobia. That is a clinical fear of the dark. It is not a casual preference. It is not mild discomfort with nighttime. It is a recognized phobia that causes significant distress in dark environments. The official theory asks you to believe that a young woman with a documented crippling fear of the dark chose, voluntarily, to walk miles alone in the dark through unlit woods after 9 p.m. Second, the feet. If Tiffany had walked 2 miles or more on railroad ballast, the gravel and loose stone that surrounds train tracks, barefoot, her feet would show it. Railroad ballast is not pavement. It is sharp, irregular, jagged material specifically designed to be difficult to walk on. Investigators and the family's experts have noted that there was no evidence of significant damage to the bottoms of Tiffany's feet, consistent with that distance and that terrain. Her feet should have been lacerated. They were not. Third, the investigation itself. This case was handled by NJ Transit Police, not the local police department. Transit police are trained for transit-related incidents. Their expertise is not, as victims advocate Stefan Rosenfeld pointed out in the Netflix documentary, homicide investigation and suspicious death investigation. The search was not properly secured. People were walking through it before evidence could be documented. Evidence was collected, but not handled according to standard protocols for a potential homicide. And then there is the matter of the axe. A bloody axe was found at the scene, on the railroad tracks, near where Tiffany died. A bloody axe. It was collected, catalogued as evidence, placed into storage. And then it went missing. A potential murder weapon, collected at the scene of a suspicious death, vanished while in police custody before it could be tested for DNA or connection to any crime. It was simply gone. Fourth, the student engineer. The apprentice engineer operating the train that night, Marvin Oliveras, gave conflicting statements to investigators. His account changed. Under oath, he eventually stated that he saw Tiffany jump out of the surrounding woods onto the tracks. The Valiante family and their attorney, Paul D'Amato, have questioned the reliability of testimony that shifted and evolved over the course of the investigation. Fifth, the DNA. No rape kit was conducted on Tiffany's body, despite the fact that she was found partially unclothed, without her shoes, miles from home, with her manner of death contested. A rape kit is standard procedure in such circumstances. It was not performed. An autopsy adequate to establish mechanism of death in a contested case was not conducted. When the Valiante family pushed for DNA testing of the evidence that was collected, a lab in Ohio analyzed the materials and concluded that NJ Transit Police had mishandled the evidence to such a degree that no conclusive results could be obtained. The evidence had been contaminated. The potential murder weapon was gone. The case had been closed as suicide within 48 hours. "We've never really grieved our daughter," Diane Valiante said. "How could we? We've just been fighting and fighting." Stephen and Diane have remortgaged their home. They have spent their savings. They have doubled and then doubled again a reward for information, bringing it to $40,000. They filed lawsuits against the medical examiner's office, NJ Transit, and the agencies that handled the investigation. They have fought in courts for access to evidence. They have pushed and pushed and pushed at a wall that keeps redirecting them without answers. In October 2022, the Netflix series Unsolved Mysteries dedicated an episode to Tiffany's case. It was titled Mystery at Mile Marker 45. The response was significant. New tips came in, new attention was focused. And for a brief period it seemed possible that someone, somewhere, who knew something would step forward. The state medical examiner reviewed the case in 2018 and upheld the suicide ruling. A letter was sent to the family's attorney offering condolences. The case officially remained closed. But the Valiante family's attorney describes the evidence situation as incomplete or inconclusive at best due to compromised handling, and independent pathologists who reviewed the case have not uniformly agreed with the original determination. Tiffany Valiante had a full scholarship to Mercy College. She had volleyball practice starting in the fall. She had bags of clothes for her dorm room that are still in their bags in her bedroom. She had plans. She had a future so specific and so close that she could feel it. She had a fear of the dark. and somewhere between her driveway and mile marker 45, something happened that the official record says was voluntary and that her family says was not. The railroad tracks are still there. NJ Transit trains still run that line, Philadelphia to Atlantic City and back again, passing mile marker 45 thousands of times a year. The memorial along the tracks has photos of Tiffany and a bench. Her parents visit it. Her father built a regulation volleyball court in their backyard after she died. Tiffany's case is not solved. The ruling says suicide. The evidence says incomplete. The family says murder. And the truth of what happened to an 18-year-old athlete on a hot July Sunday in South Jersey, what really happened, where she went and why, and who saw her and what that bloody axe was doing on the railroad tracks is still somewhere between the pines and the dark. It's January 8, 1994, Ocean City, New Jersey. The dead of winter, and the shore towns are a different world in January than they are in July. The same streets that flood with summer tourists are empty now. The same boardwalks where families eat funnel cake and watch the ocean are closed, shuttered, stripped back to their January bones. The temperature is below freezing. The wind off the Atlantic cuts through anything you're wearing. It's the kind of night where you don't go outside unless you have to. Renee Martine Lamanna went outside without shoes. Let me back up because this story doesn't start on that January night in Ocean City. It starts months earlier in a Queens apartment, and it starts with a kind of pain that reshapes a person from the inside out. Renee Lamanna was 35 years old in January 1994. She was, by any external measure, extraordinary. She had received both her bachelor's and master's degrees from the University of Scranton by the time she was 20. 2 degrees in a year, a pace that speaks to a kind of focused intellectual intensity that doesn't exist in everyone. She held a master's in history. She had volunteered with the Peace Corps in Morocco. She spoke 5 languages, including French and Arabic, with fluency. She had spent years helping immigrants navigate life in the United States, doing the difficult and underappreciated work of translation and advocacy for people with no foothold and no safety net. She was, by her sister Margaret's description, the bright light of the family. In 1994, Renee was living in Fresh Meadows in the Queens borough of New York City, studying nuclear medicine technology. She had been in a relationship for 10 years with an Afghan immigrant taxi driver. 10 years is not a casual attachment. 10 years is a life built around another person, a set of routines and assumptions and a sense of future that becomes as structural as walls and a roof. When that relationship ended, it didn't just hurt Renee, it broke something in her. She also suffered from anorexia and anxiety. Mental health challenges she had been managing, but managing is not the same as resolving. Under the weight of the breakup and those existing vulnerabilities, something gave way. On January 8, 1994, Renee was found walking the streets of Queens in an incoherent state. Police brought her to Queens Center Psychiatric Hospital for evaluation. She was admitted. She received treatment, and then she was released to family members. Her family brought her to a home in Ocean City, New Jersey. Her sister's house, near the coast, away from the apartment in Queens, and the memories embedded in it. They had dinner together. It seemed like a beginning of something, a step back towards stability. Then, at approximately 7 p.m., Renee ran from the house. She was wearing a sweatshirt, pajama bottoms, hospital slippers, and a navy blue bathrobe, which she was carrying rather than wearing. The temperature outside was below freezing. She did not take shoes. She did not take money. She did not take ID. She was last seen inside the waterfront bar in Somers Point, New Jersey, at approximately 9 p.m. that evening. Witnesses saw her inside. Her behavior was described as strange, disoriented, and then she left. Her bathrobe was found 2 blocks away from the bar. A sheriff's department bloodhound was brought in to track her scent. The dog followed it through Somers Point, tracing it between 2 homes on Central Avenue in Ocean City, and then the scent ended. Not at a door, not at a destination, just stopped. The dog had no further trail to follow, and Renee Lamanna was gone. Now let's talk about what we know about her mental state that night, because it is the key to understanding both why she disappeared and why finding her has been so difficult for 30 years. Renee is believed to be suffering from what clinicians call dissociative fugue disorder. This is a specific and genuinely unusual condition, a form of dissociative amnesia in which a person, typically following an acute psychological trauma, develops sudden retrograde amnesia. They forget who they are. They forget their name, their family, their history. They may travel to a new location and begin living a new life, with no recollection of the one they left behind. The key word in that description is genuinely. This is not metaphorical. This is not a choice. A person in a dissociative fugue is not hiding from their family. They are not punishing anyone. They are not on a spiritual journey or reinventing themselves. They have, in the most literal neurological sense, lost themselves. The self they were before the trauma is simply not accessible to them. Renee's sister Margaret has described it this way. Renee doesn't remember who she is, how long she's been gone, or where she is really going. But she is looking for us. That sentence is almost unbearable to sit with. A woman wandering the eastern United States for 30 years, looking for a family whose faces she cannot place, whose names she cannot recall. Now here is what makes this case uniquely haunting, different from every other missing person story in this document. Renee has been seen, repeatedly, over decades. Confirmed sightings close enough to pursue and documented enough to act on, and she keeps not being found. In 1995, she was reportedly spotted in New Jersey. Later that same year, she was seen at a subway station in Lower Manhattan. And this is the detail that makes the hair stand up. The man who saw her said she was standing at the platform looking at a missing person flyer. Her own missing person flyer. Looking at her own photograph, her own description, her own face on a piece of paper, and not recognizing herself. That image of a woman staring at her own missing person flyer without comprehension is the most precise illustration of dissociative fugue disorder you could construct. She was right there. She was looking at the answer, and it meant nothing to her. Between 2014 and 2016, sightings began coming in from Virginia and North Carolina. Multiple witnesses in different locations reported seeing a woman matching Renee's description. She was hitchhiking. She was carrying maps of several states. She told people she was looking for her family. She gave one police officer several aliases, including Rennie Lamont, a near miss at her own name that suggests something is still there, some fragment of identity trying to surface through the fog of forgetting. In February 2015, a woman named Ruth Collins saw Renee in a grocery store in Virginia and called Margaret immediately. "I saw your sister," she said, and Margaret's heart stopped. Ruth spent 4 days with the woman. She took photographs. The photos showed a woman who looked, by Margaret's account, almost identical to the age progression images of Renee. Margaret traveled to Virginia to meet the woman herself, but it didn't result in Renee coming home. In October 2014, another witness photographed a woman believed to be Renee at a store in Asheville, North Carolina. The woman told witnesses she was headed to Florida. She was looking for her family. In January 2016, a woman believed to be Renee was located in Florida. Police tested her fingerprints against Renee's records. She was not Renee. The trail went cold again. Renee was born on May 2, 1958. She would be 67 years old now. At the time of her disappearance, she stood 5 feet 2 inches tall and weighed 100 pounds. She has dark brown hair and brown eyes. She has a widow's peak on her forehead. She has a keloid scar on one of her inner elbows. She converted to Islam before her disappearance and does not drink alcohol or use drugs. She maintained a vegan diet in 1994. These physical and behavioral details don't vanish just because a person forgets their name. The scar is still there. The dietary habits remain, encoded not in memory but in the body. The widow's peak is genetic. Margaret has spent 30 years searching. She has run tip lines. She has maintained Facebook pages. She hired investigators. She drove to Virginia. She has answered every call, chased every lead, documented every sighting. "Let's bring Renee home. It's time," she said in 2015. "She shouldn't spend another holiday season on the street looking for us." Renee's parents, Frank and Ann Lamanna, are both gone now. They died without knowing what happened to their daughter, without seeing her face again, without being able to tell her who she is. There is something in this case that exists outside the usual contours of crime and investigation. Renee Lamanna is not necessarily dead. She is not, as far as anyone can determine, a victim of violence. She may be alive right now, somewhere in the United States, perhaps in a shelter, or a halfway house, or a rooming house somewhere in the South, carrying maps she can't quite interpret, looking for a family whose faces float at the edge of her consciousness like something half-remembered from a dream. She's not hiding, she's lost. Not physically lost. Not missing the way a person is missing when they've been taken somewhere against their will. She's lost in a way that is harder to fix, lost in the geography of her own mind, unable to find the way back to the person she was before the trauma took it from her. the investigation into her disappearance has been complicated by jurisdictional fragmentation. Her case file has moved between agencies. Different police departments in different states have responded to different sightings. The coordination required to track a person who doesn't know they're missing, moving through multiple states over multiple decades, has proven beyond what any single agency has been able to sustain. Some people, upon hearing about Renee, have suggested to Margaret that maybe her sister simply doesn't want to be found. Margaret finds this offensive, and she's right to. Dissociative fugue disorder is a medical condition, not a lifestyle choice. Renee is not living off the grid by preference. She is surviving in conditions of profound cognitive impairment, eating from dumpsters at times, according to reports, without the vocabulary to ask for the kind of help that would return her to herself. She is the most accomplished of lost people. 3 degrees, 5 languages, Peace Corps service, a decade of advocacy work for immigrants, an enormous interior life full of history and languages and places and experiences, and somewhere inside the woman walking the roads of the American Southeast with a map she can't read, all of that is still there. Compressed and inaccessible, but there. Ocean City, New Jersey in January is one of the loneliest places in America. The off-season shore has a specific desolation that people who have only seen it in summer cannot imagine. The same beauty, the same ocean, the same salt in the air, but all of it stripped of warmth and company and purpose. It is the end of things rather than the beginning. Renee ran out of her sister's house into that cold on January 8, 1994. She had her bathrobe in her arms. She had hospital slippers on her feet. The temperature was below freezing, and the wind came off the Atlantic without mercy. A bloodhound found her trail, followed it to Central Avenue, stopped. The ocean was right there. The town was empty, and Renee disappeared into the January dark, not toward anything, not away from anything in the deliberate sense, simply moving the way a person moves, when the part of the brain that provides direction and memory and identity has gone suddenly and completely dark. She is out there somewhere. That is the belief of her family and of every investigator who has followed this case with seriousness. The sightings are too numerous, too consistent in description, too geographically coherent to be entirely coincidental. A woman in her late 50s to mid-60s, small with a widow's peak and a keloid scar, hitchhiking through the American South with a stack of maps, telling people she's looking for her family. She is looking for her family. If you have ever seen a woman matching this description, if you have ever given a ride to someone like Renee, if you have ever met someone who said they were looking for their family and couldn't quite explain how they'd gotten lost, contact the authorities or reach out to the Renee Lamanna family pages online. Renee Lamanna was the bright light of her family. She was a scholar and a linguist and a person who spent her life helping other people find their footing in an unfamiliar world. And now she is the one who is unfamiliar to herself, the one who needs someone to point at her face on a flyer and say, "That's you, that's your name. We've been looking for you." She's been gone for 31 years. The bar where she was last seen still exists. The town she walked out into that January night is still there, and every January it goes quiet again. And the wind comes off the ocean, and somewhere out there Renee is still looking. Her family has never stopped looking back. It's April 29th, 2019, Jersey City, New Jersey. A Monday evening, and the city is doing what Jersey City does on a spring Monday, moving. The Hudson River glitters a quarter mile to the east, and across the water, Manhattan's skyline catches the last of the afternoon light. Jersey City is one of those places that exists in New York's gravitational field without being New York. A city of its own, with its own rhythms, its own immigrant communities, its own stories stacked on every block. On Vroom Street, in a residential neighborhood of multi-family homes and apartment buildings, a young woman stepped out of her apartment building and disappeared. Her name was Mayushi Vikas Bhagat. She was 28 years old. Let me tell you who Mayushi was, because she deserves that first, before the silence and the questions and the investigation that consumed her family for years. She was born on July 12, 1994, in Vadodara, in the state of Gujarat in western India. Vadodara is a city of culture and learning, home to some of India's finest universities. It's the kind of place that produces people with ambition and direction, people who see the shape of the world and decide they want to stand somewhere larger in it. Mayushi was exactly that kind of person. She came to the United States in 2016 on an F1 student visa, the visa that exists for the specific purpose of allowing international students to pursue degrees at American universities. She enrolled first at the University of New Hampshire, then transferred to the New York Institute of Technology in New York City, where she pursued a master's degree in electrical engineering. She was nearly finished. She was almost done. The finish line was in sight. She was described by everyone who knew her as intelligent, responsible, kind, and in the word her family used repeatedly, very capable. She spoke 3 languages, English, Hindi, and Urdu. Her English was fluent and precise. She was living with her parents at 35 Vroom Street in Jersey City. Her mother and father had come to the United States to be near her. Her brother had recently arrived to study as well. The family had gathered in America around Mayushi's academic journey, the way immigrant families sometimes do, building a temporary home at the center of someone's dream. She already had a job lined up in California after graduation, an engineering position. She had plans, specific and concrete, the kind that exist when you've done the work and earned the right to make them. California after graduation, a career in the field she'd spent years training for, the life that was supposed to be next. On the evening of April 29, 2019, Mayushi stepped out of the apartment at 35 Vroom Street, wearing colorful pajama pants and a black t-shirt. That is the last confirmed image of her. Colorful pajama pants and a black t-shirt, the clothing of a person going somewhere casual, somewhere close, somewhere she expected to return from quickly. You don't wear pajama pants on a long journey. You don't step out in house clothes with the intention of not coming back. Her family waited. The hours passed. She didn't come home. On May 1, 2019, 2 days after Mayushi was last seen, her father Vikas received a WhatsApp message from her phone. The message came in at approximately 12:30 a.m. It said, in effect, that she was fine, that she didn't want to be bothered, that she would be home on May 3rd. Now let's stop at that message, because it is the pivot point of this entire case, the detail that separates a concerning disappearance from a deeply suspicious one. Vikas Bhagat, Mayushi's father, read that message and immediately knew something was wrong. Not because of what it said, but because of how it was written. The language in the text was, in his word and in the word of investigators who later analyzed it, poor. The English was incorrect in ways that Mayushi's English was not. She was a graduate student in electrical engineering at an American university. She communicated in English every day. Her writing was precise. The person who sent that text did not write the way Mayushi wrote. The family does not believe Mayushi sent those messages. They believe someone else was in possession of her phone on the night of May 1st, 2 days after she disappeared, and sent those messages deliberately. Not to reassure her family, to buy time, to delay the moment when anyone would go looking for her seriously. When Vikas tried to call her on May 1st, after receiving the text, the call went to voicemail. He contacted Jersey City Police and filed a missing person report. The response was not immediate or aggressive. Mayushi was an adult. She had sent messages, even if those messages seemed wrong to her father. The system moved slowly. The family and friends raised money, launched their own search, distributed flyers, contacted Indian community organizations in New Jersey and New York. They exhausted every personal resource available to them before the official machinery caught up. Let's talk about the geography of this disappearance, because it matters. Jersey City on a Monday evening is not empty. Vroom Street sits in a residential neighborhood with foot traffic and street-level visibility. Between the apartment and wherever Mayushi went, there should have been witnesses. There should have been cameras. Jersey City is dense. It has businesses in transit and the constant visual documentation of modern urban life. And yet, Mayushi Bhagat walked out of her building in pajama pants and a black shirt, and no confirmed sighting exists after that moment. No surveillance footage placing her at a bus stop or a convenience store or a path station. No cell tower ping, no credit card transaction. She left her apartment and the city absorbed her without leaving a trace. Her friends were in South Plainfield, New Jersey. Investigators noted this early, that the South Plainfield area was somewhere she might have been headed. South Plainfield is about 20 miles west of Jersey City. Not a long drive. Not an unusual destination for a young person visiting friends. If she had gone there voluntarily, on her own initiative, for her own reasons, she would have needed transportation, and she would have arrived somewhere. No one in South Plainfield confirmed seeing her. Now let's talk about what the investigation found, or rather, what it didn't find. The FBI's Newark division formally added Mayushi to its missing persons webpage in July 2022. That is 3 years after she disappeared. 3 years of her case existing in a different tier of urgency, a tier that didn't include the FBI's full attention and resources until 2022. For 3 years, her family had been living inside the question with limited official support. When the FBI formally acknowledged the case, they offered a $10,000 reward for information leading to Mayushi's location or recovery, and to the identification, arrest, and conviction of those responsible for her disappearance. The phrasing of that reward is important. The FBI doesn't frame rewards around the identification and conviction of those responsible for routine missing persons cases. They frame it that way when they believe a crime was committed, when they believe someone did something to someone. The investigation is jointly handled by the FBI Newark Field Office, the Jersey City's Police Department, and the New Jersey State Police, 3 agencies, a decade later with federal resources in play and still no answers. Now let me be precise about the timing question, because the internet has been unkind about this case, and the family deserves clarity. When the FBI renewed the reward announcement in late 2023 and again in 2026, social media erupted with outrage, with people asking why years later no one had found her, why it took the FBI so long to get formally involved. The anger is understandable. The anger is not entirely wrong, but it misunderstands how the system works, or rather, how it fails to work for immigrant families whose cases don't catch the attention of major media outlets in the first critical weeks. Mayushi Bhagat was an Indian national on a student visa. Her family spoke with accents and filed reports in a system that did not prioritize cases the way it should have. Her disappearance got coverage in Indian media, in Indian American community outlets, and in the hyperlocal Jersey City press. It did not become a national story. It did not generate the wall-to-wall coverage that drives official urgency, and so it moved slowly through official channels until 2022, when the FBI's public commitment made the case visible in a new way. That visibility should have come faster. That's not a radical position. That's just true. Here's what we can piece together from the available evidence. Mayushi was almost finished with her degree. She had a job waiting. She had a future in California that was weeks or months away from beginning. The family was together in America. Everything was pointing forward. And then she walked out in pajama pants on a Monday evening. And someone sent messages from her phone 2 days later that her own father recognized immediately as not hers. The pajama pants are the detail that stays with me. You dress for what you're doing. You put on real clothes when you're going somewhere. When you're running an errand, visiting a friend for an hour, stepping out for something minor, you stay in what you're wearing. Mayushi's clothing tells you she expected to be back quickly, expected to come back. Someone did something that made that return impossible. That WhatsApp message, typed in English that wasn't her English, sent from her phone on May 1st, is the voice of whoever took her, speaking through her device, trying to make her family stand down. It's a calculation. "Don't call the police yet," she said. "She's fine," she said May 3rd. Wait, May 3rd came and went. Mayushi didn't come home. She would be 30 years old now if she's alive. The electrical engineering degree she was almost finished with. The California job. The family that gathered in America to be near her. All of it frozen in April 2019, in the moment before she stepped outside wearing colorful pajama pants and a black t-shirt on a Monday evening in Jersey City. It's August 21st, 1982, North Wildwood, New Jersey. A Saturday morning in the dog days of summer, and North Wildwood is at peak chaos, the way every Cape May County shore town is at peak chaos in August. The Wildwoods are a different creature from the more restrained Ocean City or the family-friendly Cape May. The Wildwood Strip is boardwalk in the truest, loudest, most neon-soaked sense. Motels with names designed to evoke beaches and tropical getaways. Amusement piers, the smell of funnel cake and hot asphalt. Teenagers from South Philly and North Jersey and Delaware packed into every boarding house and motel room within walking distance of the sand. But the Anglosia section of North Wildwood is different from all of that. Anglosia, named for a section of the town that sits at the northern tip of the barrier island, is quieter, more residential. Working-class families, year-round residents. The kind of neighborhood where a 20-year-old man could live at his own place without it being a statement. Just a fact of life in a shore community with affordable off-season rentals. Brandon Keith Robbins was 20 years old in August 1982. He was 5 feet 11 inches tall and weighed 125 pounds, lean the way young men often are when they're still finding their body's shape. He had brown hair and brown eyes. He was 20, which means he had probably known North Wildwood his whole life, the way people from Cape May County know the shore towns intimately, the way the geography of a place gets into you when you grow up breathing its salt air. On the morning of August 21st, 1982, at 8 a.m., Brandon Keith Robbins left his home in the Anglosea section of North Wildwood. He had been seen there. He was known to be there, and then he walked out the door. He never came back. He was never seen again. 4 days later, on August 25th, 1982, someone reported Brandon missing to the North Wildwood Police Department. 4 days. That gap between August 21st and August 25th is worth examining because it tells you something about how his disappearance was initially processed by the people around him. A 20-year-old man at the shore in August of 1982. People weren't immediately alarmed. People disappear into the summer for days at a time. They visit friends in other shore towns. They end up somewhere different from where they planned to be. The machinery of concern moved slowly. When the police started investigating, they discovered something that immediately redirected their attention. A friend of Brandon's was driving his vehicle. Brandon's car, a black 1978 Chevrolet Astro van, was in the possession of someone else entirely. Not hidden. Not parked in a lot somewhere. Being driven by a person who knew Brandon. That friend, when interviewed by investigators, had an explanation. Brandon had lent him the van. Brandon had traveled to the Philadelphia area. Brandon had told him he was going somewhere and left the van behind for this person to use. Let's sit with that story for a moment, because it is the story that has defined this case for 40+ years. A friend of Brandon's, with his van, saying Brandon went to Philadelphia and lent him the vehicle. This explanation was presented to investigators in 1982, and it was all they had. No body, no crime scene, no witnesses to anything violent. Just a young man gone, a friend with the van, and a story about Philadelphia. The Cape May County Prosecutor's Office, which handles this case, has classified the disappearance as one in which foul play is suspected. That is not the classification of a case where investigators believe a young man voluntarily left his life behind and started fresh somewhere in Pennsylvania. That is the classification of a case where investigators believe something criminal happened and have not been able to prove it. Here is what we know. Brandon was last seen at his own home, in his own neighborhood, at 8 a.m. on a Saturday in August. That is a specific early morning departure time, not the middle of the night, not a time when someone disappears unnoticed. 8 in the morning on a summer Saturday in a shore community. There are people up. There is activity. And yet no witness placed him anywhere after leaving his Anglosea address. He did not take his van. This is the detail that anchors everything. In 1982, a 20-year-old man's van is his independence, his freedom, his ability to get anywhere he wants to go. If Brandon had decided to go to Philadelphia or anywhere else for any reason, he would have driven himself. He had the van. He was at home with the van. A 20-year-old man in August 1982 who wants to go to Philadelphia takes his own vehicle. He does not lend his van to a friend and hitchhike or take a bus, unless something happened that made that impossible. Unless the departure from Anglosea at 8 a.m. was not voluntary. Now let's think about the friend with the van. Someone who knew Brandon well enough to have his van, to be the person a story was built around, to be the person investigators found when they started pulling on threads. That is a person of interest, even if they were never charged. That is a person who was in the immediate circle of Brandon Robbins's life in August of 1982. The story about Philadelphia came from that person. The only explanation for why Brandon's van was being driven by someone else came from that person, and Brandon never arrived anywhere. No one in Philadelphia or anywhere else ever confirmed seeing him. No record of Brandon surfaced in any database in the weeks and months and years after he disappeared. His family heard nothing. His friends heard nothing. The Cape May County Prosecutor's Office, reviewing the case 40+ years later, still lists foul play as suspected. Think about August 1982 in Cape May County. The shore was packed. Drug trafficking through shore communities, the movement of narcotics through coastal New Jersey along the Atlantic City corridor, was a documented and growing problem in that era. The region was connected by roads that led both north toward Philadelphia and south toward other distribution networks. A 20-year-old man living alone in a rental in the Anglosea section could, without much difficulty, have come into contact with aspects of that world, as a participant, as a witness, as someone who simply knew the wrong thing at the wrong time. The story about Philadelphia, offered by the person who had Brandon's van, points in a specific direction. It is a story designed to move Brandon's disappearance away from Cape May County, to project the last known event of his life 60 miles north into a different jurisdiction. If you wanted to make someone's disappearance hard to investigate, making investigators look in Philadelphia while the actual events had occurred in North Wildwood is a very effective strategy. In 1982, before digital records and national databases and coordinated law enforcement communication infrastructure, the Philadelphia lead would have sent resources in exactly the wrong direction. No remains have ever been found, no clothing, no possessions, nothing that connects Brandon Keith Robbins to any specific location after 8 a.m. on August 21, 1982. The case number at the Cape May County Prosecutor's Office is 827289. Investigators have DNA available, dental records available, fingerprints available. If Brandon's remains were found anywhere in the country, they could be identified. The mechanism for identification exists and has existed for decades. He has not been found. Brandon would be approximately 63 years old today. Born around 1962, a full generation buried under time, the world of North Wildwood in August 1982 is almost unrecognizable from the present. The people who were 20 then are in their 60s now. The person who had his van, whoever they were, has had 40-plus years to carry whatever they know. The person who knows what happened on Taylor Avenue in Anglesea on the morning of August 21, 1982, has had 40-plus years to decide whether to speak. The Cape May County shore is a small world even when it seems large in summer. The permanent community knows each other. People remember 1982. People remember the summer that Brandon Robbins disappeared, even if they never said so publicly. Somewhere in the world, someone knows who had that van and why, and what happened between 8 a.m. on a Saturday in August, and the moment 4 days later when someone finally called the North Wildwood police. Brandon Keith Robbins left his home at 8 a.m. in the late summer of 1982, wearing whatever he was wearing, going wherever he was going. His van was borrowed by a friend who told a story about Philadelphia, and Brandon was never seen again. The Cape May County Prosecutor's Office is still investigating. The tip line is still active. The case file is still open with a number that was assigned in 1982 and hasn't been closed since. 43 summers have passed on the Jersey Shore. The Wildwoods have changed and stayed the same in the way shore towns do, cycling through generations of visitors while the permanent community holds steady underneath. And somewhere in that community, in the memory of someone who was there in August 1982 and is still alive today, the answer to what happened to Brandon Keith Robbins is sitting in silence, waiting for someone to finally decide that 43 years is long enough. The van was accounted for. Brandon never was. It's June 24, 1974, Burlington City, New Jersey. Monday morning and the summer is already heavy with humidity, that thick South Jersey air that clings to your skin the moment you step outside. School is out. The whole neighborhood smells like cut grass and sunscreen. Kids are riding bikes. Fathers are washing cars in driveways. It's the kind of ordinary American Monday that you'd forget by Tuesday. But Margaret Ellen Fox had a plan. Maggie, as her family called her, was 14 years old. She was quiet, studious, a girl who had just graduated from St. Paul's Grammar School 2 weeks earlier. She took piano lessons. She loved riding horses. She wore glasses with hexagonal lenses, gold wireframes. She had freckles and brown hair and blue eyes, and 2 of her front right teeth were missing, a detail so specific that it would later become one of the few anchors investigators had in trying to identify her. She was a good kid. She was trying to be responsible. Here's what you need to understand about Margaret's situation. She was a teenager in the summer of 1974. There were no part-time jobs waiting for her on every corner. If you wanted to earn your own money as a 14-year-old girl in a South Jersey town, you babysat. That was the job. That was the path. And Margaret wanted that independence. She wanted to show her parents she was capable. So a few days earlier, she and her cousin Lynn Parks had placed a classified ad in the local newspaper. A simple listing, a girl offering babysitting services for the summer, a phone number to call. It's such an innocent thing. A kid putting her number in a newspaper to earn money. The most ordinary act in the world. Someone called that number. On June 19th, 5 days before Margaret disappeared, a man called the number in the ad. He told Lynn Parks that his name was John Marshall. He said he had a 5-year-old son who needed watching. He mentioned he had a backyard swimming pool and a swing set at his home in Mount Holly, New Jersey. He said the job would pay $40 to babysit his child for 4 hours a day, 5 days a week. $40 a week in 1974 was real money for a teenager. But Lynn's parents said no. They didn't like the setup. They wouldn't let their daughter go to a stranger's house for an interview. So Lynn passed the man's contact information to Margaret. Now, this is the moment that lives in the mind of everyone who studies this case. The moment one teenager says to another, "Here, take this number." A handoff as innocent as passing a note in class. Lynn's parents said no, and their daughter stayed home that summer. Margaret's parents didn't know the same warning had been issued. When Margaret called John Marshall back, he was charming. He told her he'd pay her well. He said he'd meet her in Mount Holly at the corner of Mill and High Streets on June 24th. He said he'd pick her up in a red Volkswagen. Let me give you the geography because it matters. Burlington City and Mount Holly are about 7 miles apart. Not far, not a mysterious journey into unknown territory. A short bus ride between two ordinary South Jersey towns. Margaret had taken that bus before. She knew the route. This wasn't an adventure. This was an errand. On the morning of June 24th, Margaret got dressed carefully. She put on a light blue, long-sleeved, floral-patterned blouse, squared at the top and flared at the waist. She pulled on maroon flared jeans with a yellow patch on the knee, the kind of detail only 1974 fashion could produce. She slipped on brown sandals with a heel strap. She put on her gold necklace with flowers and a blue stone, and a matching gold charm bracelet. She picked up her brown bag and her glasses case, the one with the Huckleberry Hound design on it. She looked like a teenager going somewhere. She looked like someone with a plan. Her younger brother walked her to the bus stop. He watched her climb on the 8:40 a.m. bus to Mount Holly. That was the last time anyone in her family saw Margaret Ellen Fox. Let's talk about what witnesses saw in Mount Holly that morning, because this is crucial. Investigators confirmed that multiple witnesses spotted a girl matching Margaret's description getting off the bus near Mill and High Streets. She made it. She got there. She stepped off that bus in a normal New Jersey town on a normal June morning, and she waited at that corner for a red Volkswagen driven by a man named John Marshall. That Volkswagen never came. Or it came, and it never left. We don't know which, because after those witness sightings near Mill and High Streets, Margaret Ellen Fox simply stops existing in the historical record. No one sees her again. No one in the entire world, as far as we know, lays eyes on Margaret Fox after that corner in Mount Holly on the morning of June 24th, 1974. When Margaret didn't call home that afternoon as promised, her parents began to worry. By evening, when she still hadn't returned, the worry became something deeper. They reported her missing, and within hours of that report, the FBI was involved. Not because of anything unusual they'd found, but because of something unusual that happened next. A phone rang in the Fox household. Investigators were already recording all incoming calls, and that recording captures one of the most chilling moments in this entire case. A male voice, calm, almost conversational. He tells the family he has Margaret, he wants money, and then he says this, a line that has haunted investigators for 50 years. $10,000 might be a lot of bread, but your daughter's life is the buttered topping. Read that again. $10,000 might be a lot of bread, but your daughter's life is the buttered topping. That phrasing is not the phrasing of a panicked opportunist. That is not the awkward language of someone who grabbed a girl on impulse and called in a moment of desperation. That is rehearsed. That is deliberate. That is someone who thought about what he was going to say. Someone who had language ready. Someone who had done this before, or, at the very least, had thought carefully about doing it. The family was left reeling. There were discussions about paying the ransom, about making contact with the caller. But in the end, the FBI advised caution, and no exchange was ever made, and the caller never called back. Now let's trace the investigation, because this is where it fractures into shadows. The phone number John Marshall had given Margaret and Lynn was traced to a payphone. Not a home phone, not a business line. A payphone at a supermarket in Lumberton, New Jersey. That single detail tells you everything you need to know about premeditation. A man who uses a payphone to respond to a babysitting ad is a man who does not want to be found. He was covering his tracks before there were any tracks to cover. He had done this before, or he had planned it so thoroughly that the methodology was second nature. Investigators began interviewing other families in the area, and here is where the horror expands outward like a ripple. Several other parents came forward to say that someone had tried to lure their daughters with fake job offers, the same pattern, a newspaper ad, a call, a meeting arranged. Most of those families had said no. Most of those daughters had stayed home. Margaret's family hadn't known to say no. The warning never reached them. Who was John Marshall? Investigators never identified him. The name is certainly false. The phone number leads to a wall. The red Volkswagen, if it ever existed, was never found. John Marshall is a ghost. A voice on a telephone recording from 1974. A man who called a child about a babysitting job and then made her disappear. In 1976, 2 years after Margaret vanished, a man came forward and confessed to kidnapping her. For a brief and agonizing stretch of time, investigators believed they had their answer. But the confession unraveled. The man turned out to have been hospitalized at the time of Margaret's disappearance. His story was a fabrication, likely constructed for attention or some kind of warped notoriety. The confession was deemed a hoax. The Fox case went back to zero. Let's talk about Margaret herself for a moment, because she deserves more than just the circumstances of her disappearance. Her diaries were found during the investigation. She wrote in them regularly, the way many quiet interior teenagers do, and those diary entries revealed a complicated inner life. She wrote about being bullied in school, about having snowballs thrown at her by classmates. She wrote about wanting to escape, about fantasizing about moving to California or Florida, and starting a new life somewhere warm and far from the things that hurt her. Some investigators latched onto those diary entries as evidence that Margaret might have run away, that the babysitting interview was cover for something else, that she saw an opportunity and took it. Let's dismantle that theory clearly. Margaret was 14. She was going to an interview in a neighboring town. She told her family where she was going. Her brother walked her to the bus stop and watched her board. She had no luggage, no packed bag, no money beyond whatever small amount she carried. And hours after she disappeared, a man called her family demanding $10,000 for her safe return. Runaways don't have ransoms. Runaways don't generate ransom calls from adult men who had previously arranged fake babysitting interviews using untraceable payphones. The diary entries describing dreams of California are the diary entries of any teenager who has ever felt out of place in the town where they grew up. They are not a criminal profile. They are a child's private thoughts. Margaret Fox did not run away. Margaret Fox was taken, and recent forensic work has given investigators something new to work with. Something extraordinary, in fact. DNA testing was conducted on the ransom note that arrived in the investigation, and genetic material was found on the envelope. Material that doesn't belong to anyone in the Fox family. A genetic signature, sitting in a vial somewhere, waiting for a name, waiting for a database match, waiting for the technology to catch up to the crime. So far, no match has been found. The FBI's forensics lab in Quantico spent years working on that original ransom call recording, which had degraded significantly over the decades. New technology eventually allowed them to enhance the audio to a point where it could be released publicly. On the 45th anniversary of Margaret's disappearance, in June 2019, they released it, hoping someone somewhere would hear that voice and recognize it. A son recognizing his father's cadence, a nephew remembering an uncle, a neighbor hearing a voice they'd tried to forget. $10,000 might be a lot of bread, but your daughter's life is the buttered topping. Listen to that sentence. That is someone who rehearsed. That is someone who felt clever. That is someone who in 1974 believed he would never be caught. The FBI also released age-progressed images of Margaret. What she might look like at 49. What she might look like at 56. A $25,000 reward has been offered for information leading to an arrest or conviction. Burlington City Police Chief John Fine, when he spoke at the 45th anniversary press conference, said something that has stayed with me. He said that for decades, the local community would hear a request at the end of church services every week, a plea from the congregation, pray for the safe return of Margaret Fox, every week. For years, the community never let her go. Her disappearance haunted the streets of Burlington City the way hauntings do, quietly and persistently, just below the surface of everyday life. Margaret's parents are gone now. Her father David and mother Mary Fox both died without ever knowing what happened to their daughter, but her siblings are still alive. Some still live in the Burlington area. They are the keepers of the question now. They are the ones who carry June 24th on the calendar every year and feel its weight. Margaret would be 65 years old today if she's alive. Think about what that means. A girl who graduated from grammar school 2 weeks before she vanished. A girl who took piano lessons and loved horses and wore glasses with hexagonal frames and kept a diary full of ordinary teenage dreams. She would be 65 now, She could be a grandmother. She could be living a life that spans the entire arc from that summer morning in 1974 to today. Or she could have died on the day she disappeared, murdered by a man named John Marshall, who used a payphone and a fake job offer and drove a red Volkswagen. The corner of Mill and High Streets in Mount Holly still exists. Buses still run between Burlington City and Mount Holly. The summer of 1974 is long gone, but the question it left behind is not. A 14-year-old girl stepped off a bus at that corner, wearing maroon jeans with a yellow patch on the knee, carrying a brown bag and a glasses case with Huckleberry Hound on it. She stood at that corner and waited for someone she trusted to show up, and whoever showed up was not what she expected. The bus brought her to that corner. Nothing brought her home. It's December 17th, 1962, Vineland, New Jersey. 8 days before Christmas, and the whole country is in that particular pre-holiday mode that 1962 America did with more ceremony than we do now. The television is on. There are decorations in windows. The street in front of the Jones house on Taylor Avenue is quiet in the way that residential streets were quiet in early 60s. South Jersey, few cars, neighbors who knew each other, the unhurried pace of a working-class community living its ordinary life. It is cold, the kind of cold that makes mothers bundle their children before letting them out the back door. Billy Jones was 3 years old. His full name was William Ebenezer Jones, Jr., and everything about that name is too large for a 3-year-old, which is why everyone called him Billy. He was born March 5, 1959. He had a vaccination scar on his left arm that had healed in the shape of a giraffe, a detail so specific and so small and so perfectly 3-year-old that it became one of the only identifying marks investigators had to work with across the decades that followed. Billy loved dogs. This is important. It's important because it's true, and because it explains something about what happened that December morning, or at least about how vulnerable he was to it. The family had 2 dogs, a Facet hound named Baby Cakes and a collie. Billy was particularly close to Baby Cakes, the kind of bond that exists between small children and patient, gentle dogs who seem to understand that their job is to be steady and warm and present. He had just been given a puppy shortly before he disappeared. Billy Jones was, in the truest sense, a dog kid. On the morning of December 17th, Billy and his 2-year-old sister Jill put on their snowsuits and went out to play in the backyard. Billy was dressed in a light blue or grayish snowsuit with a navy collar and silver buttons. His hat matched his snowsuit. He had tan high-top shoes with yellow laces. His mother Evelyn had given him a dime before he went outside. His father William Sr. was at work. Inside, Evelyn was managing the house, preparing lunch, caring for the youngest child, 1-year-old Bart. She checked on Billy and Jill through the window periodically. This is the detail that every parent reading this will recognize with absolute certainty. You check through the window. You watch for a moment, confirm they're there, go back to what you're doing. The backyard is enclosed. The children are together. You're 20 feet away. At some point, Evelyn returned to the window and Billy was gone. Jill came to the back door. She was carrying a plastic potted poinsettia, a holiday plant, the kind sold door to door in the weeks before Christmas. When Evelyn asked Jill where Billy was, Jill said the bogeyman had taken him. She was 2 years old. Let that sink in. Evelyn ran outside immediately. She searched the backyard, the surrounding area, the neighbors' properties. Nothing. Billy wasn't there. Moments after she began searching, a man in a green car pulled up and asked her, "Are you Mrs. Jones?" She didn't recognize him. She kept searching. She didn't engage with him. In retrospect, that man in the green car has become one of the most haunting unresolved details in a case full of haunting unresolved details. Who was he? Why did he know her name? Why was he there at exactly the moment when a child had just vanished from the backyard of her house? No one ever identified him. He drove away and the record swallowed him. A neighbor later confirmed that around 11:45 a.m. that morning, Billy had been outside the neighbor's house, and they had told him to go home. That is the last confirmed sighting of Billy Jones by anyone outside his immediate family. He was walking back to his own house in his snowsuit with the yellow shoelaces, and then he wasn't there anymore. The Palace of Depression was a real landmark in Vineland during that era. It was an unusual folk art installation created by an eccentric local man, built from discarded automobile parts and scrap metal, and it had become a tourist attraction and a neighborhood gathering place. It sat within reach of the Jones home. Children played there. Teenagers hung out there. 2 men fighting in front of an oil drum fire at the Palace of Depression. And then Jill remembered running, and seeing her door. The police had already searched the Palace of Depression in the immediate aftermath of Billy's disappearance, finding nothing. But Jill's hypnotic memory added a layer of specificity that hadn't been there before. 2 men, a fire, Billy present, and then Jill running. What happened at the Palace of Depression that morning? Were the men fighting over Billy? Was one of them taking him? Was Jill running because she was scared? Or was the memory fragmentary and partial, a 2-year-old's impression of an event she couldn't fully process? There's no way to know. In 2009, Vineland Police Department Detective Christian Kirschner reopened the case. Kirschner, who joined the force in 1998, hadn't even been born when Billy disappeared. He approached it with the fresh eyes of someone who didn't carry the weight of the original failed investigation. He noted the advances in technology, DNA testing, facial recognition, digital databases that didn't exist in 1962. And he noted something that investigators of the era had already understood but couldn't act on. In 1962, giving a 3-year-old a new identity was trivially easy. Records were different. Birth certificates were paper, filed in county courthouses, not cross-referenced nationally. A couple who wanted a child, who found a 3-year-old boy wandering near a tourist landmark in South Jersey in December 1962, could have walked him to a different county, given him a new name, enrolled him in a school under that name, and built a new life around him. No national database would have caught the discrepancy. No digital record would have followed Billy across state lines. He could have become someone else entirely before Christmas. Jill believes this is what happened. Not that her brother drowned in Little Robin Branch. Not that a stranger murdered him and hid the body so effectively that 60-plus years of searches never found it. She believes, with the certainty of a gut feeling that has outlasted every grief and every disappointment, that someone took Billy to replace a child they had lost. That somewhere in America there is a man who is 65 years old, who grew up with a name and a family that weren't his, who has a giraffe-shaped vaccination scar on his left arm. She has seen Billy in the faces of strangers, she said once, and she has been tempted more than once to stop those strangers and ask, "Do you have a scar shaped like a giraffe on your arm?" Here is what FBI Special Agent John Masiska said when asked about the case. "We're just trying to find out if anyone has any information regarding his whereabouts or if anyone might know who may have been involved in his disappearance." Quiet words. The careful language of federal law enforcement on a case that has no body, no forensic evidence, no suspect, and no definitive theory after 63 years. Billy's parents are gone now. William Sr. and Evelyn Jones are both dead. His younger brother Bart is dead. Jill alone carries the family's memory, the urn with her parents' and brother's ashes on top of a cabinet in her home. "When someone dies," she said, "you know where they're at. But with Billy, you don't have an answer. That is the specific horror of a case like this, the grief of a death without confirmation, the impossible arithmetic of not knowing whether you're mourning or waiting. 63 years of not knowing whether to grieve or hope. Billy Jones would be 66 years old today. He would be retirement age. He might be a grandfather. He might have a life built around interests he developed after 1962, interests his family never got to see take shape. He might be in New Jersey still, or Pennsylvania or California, or somewhere in between, living under a name that isn't his, with or without any knowledge that somewhere in Vineland there is a woman who loves him and has never stopped looking. The vaccination scar is still there. Whatever the rest of his life looks like, the scar shaped like a giraffe on his left arm is still there. Billy Jones walked away from his backyard in a light blue snowsuit on a cold December morning, 8 days before Christmas 1962. His 2-year-old sister said the bogeyman took him. A man in a green car asked for his mother by name and drove away. A neighbor told him to go home, and he started walking. He never arrived. It's March 11th, 2009. Ocean City, New Jersey, a Wednesday, and it's the off-season, which means Ocean City is a completely different place than the one that exists in the summer. The boardwalk is quiet. The Ferris wheel isn't running. The pizza stands and candy shops and saltwater taffy stores are shuttered, their windows dark, their awnings furled tight against the winter wind off the Atlantic. Ocean City in March is a skeleton town, a framework of a community waiting for Memorial Day to bring it back to life. The permanent residents know this version of the city. This is the real one. This is the Ocean City that belongs to people who grew up here, who graduated from Ocean City High School, who work year-round jobs and walk empty boardwalks in the winter and know which diners are open in January, and which aren't. John Thomas Weisbecker was one of those people. He had grown up here, he knew this town. John was 21 years old. He was born December 30th, 1987, which meant he had just turned 21 2.5 months before he disappeared. He was 6 feet 2 inches tall and weighed approximately 180 pounds. He had brown hair, blue eyes, and a mustache at the time of his disappearance, though he had worn a full beard at other points, and photographs from different periods in his life show both versions. He had numerous tattoos on his torso and both arms. He had grown up in Ocean City. He graduated from Ocean City High School in 2006. He was a restaurant kid, the kind of person who has worked in kitchens and front of house since their mid-teens, because that's what you do in a shore town with a thriving summer hospitality economy. He knew the work. He was good at it. He had a dream: attend culinary school, get the training, and eventually own his own restaurant. That dream was not vague. It was a plan. He was supposed to start culinary school in the fall of 2009, a few months after the day he disappeared. The dream had a timeline. On the morning of March 11th, John and his mother, Jennifer Powell, went shopping together. He lived with her and his sister in the house on Asbury Avenue, in the 200 block, close enough to the ocean that you could probably smell it on certain winds. Jennifer had been supporting John while he was in between jobs during the off-season. The way shore town families support each other through the long, quiet winter before the summer economy wakes up. She had bought him new shirts, work shirts, because he had just lined up a job and was scheduled to start the very next day, March 12th, at Kessel's Corner, a sandwich shop in town. The shirts were hanging in his closet waiting. He was back on track. After shopping, Jennifer dropped John off at home and went to work. John was at the house. He was there at 11 a.m. when the mail carrier arrived to deliver the day's mail, including an unemployment check addressed to John. The mail carrier, in a detail that later proved critical, saw John that morning when the mail was delivered. That postal worker is the last person known to have seen John Weisbecker alive. When Jennifer came home from work at 8:30 that evening, the house was quiet. John's car, a Lincoln LS, was in the driveway. She assumed he had gone out with friends and been picked up. Since his car was there, she wasn't alarmed. He was 21 years old, but John didn't come home. Police have been careful about what they share. Detective Daniel Lancaster, who took the initial report on March 12th and has remained the lead investigator on the case for years, has chosen his public words deliberately. He has said, "We know there are several people that can provide us with information that would lead us to John's whereabouts." Note the present tense. Not new. No. Living people, current residents of the Cape May County area, are walking around with knowledge of what happened to John Weisbecker on March 11th, 2009. They have that knowledge right now today, and they are choosing not to come forward. Investigators found no major drug involvement when they examined the hard drive of John's computer. They found nothing obviously criminal in his digital footprint. They found no explanation for why anyone would want to harm him specifically, at least not one they've shared publicly. And yet they believe he was taken by people who knew him, in a group, on a Wednesday morning in March. What was this about? What did John know, or have, or see, or get involved with, that ended with multiple people coming to his house and taking him? In a small shore town like Ocean City in the off-season, when the tourist economy is dormant and the permanent community is reduced to the people who actually live there year-round, trouble tends to travel in tight circles. People know each other. People know each other's business. And sometimes what's happening in one person's orbit reaches into another person's life in ways they don't necessarily understand until it's too late. John's mother, Jennifer, has carried this for 15+ years. Her daughter is married with children now, and her son has a nephew named after him. A boy growing up with his uncle's name, an uncle who vanished from a house on Asbury Avenue before that nephew was born. Jennifer has said that just knowing would make so much of a difference. Not justice necessarily, not an arrest, not a trial, just the knowledge. Where is he? What happened? The answer is in this county. That's what investigators believe. It's not in a different state, not in a foreign country, not in some location that requires a global search to find. It's here, in Cape May County, held by people who live here, who shop at the same stores and drive the same roads as Jennifer Powell and the Ocean City Police Department. The shirts John's mother bought for his new job are presumably gone now. The Lincoln LS was repossessed eventually. He never missed a payment before he disappeared, but he couldn't make payments once he was gone. The sandwich shop where he was supposed to start March 12th has a different staff now, a different life. No marker of the person who was supposed to walk through the door that morning and didn't. Culinary school in the fall of 2009 never happened. The restaurant he was going to own someday, the one that lived in his plans as a specific and attainable future, never opened. John Weisbecker would be 37 years old today. The house on Asbury Avenue is still there. Ocean City is still there. The people who know what happened are still there. And the mail is still on the counter, in a figurative sense, unclaimed. The unemployment check that John Weisbecker didn't pick up on the morning of March 11, 2009, the morning that someone came to the house and took him. Somewhere in Cape May County, the truth is walking around. The FBI's $50,000 says so. Detective Lancaster's present tense certainty says so. And a mother who named her grandson after her missing son, who says just knowing would make a difference, is still waiting for that truth to find its way home.